If you're like me and you're a fan of Alec Soth and his work, you might remember not too long ago it seemed that there was always a new video from Alec himself here on YouTube discussing photography and photo books. You truly don't know what you've got until it's gone. But considering he has a brand new book out with Mac titled Advice for Young Artists, I invited him here on the channel to share about the book and just how it came to life. Let's get right into it. Anyone who is familiar with my channel, obviously, I'm sure they know who you are, and they've seen, at least in my videos, I've talked about plenty of your books before. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. And we're talking about Advice for Young Artists, your latest book, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this one. Just for starters, kind of tell me and everyone a little bit about how this book came to be, and I really want to talk about why now, I guess, afterwards. But to get into it, tell us a little bit about the book itself.
Sure. I mean, like all of my work, it didn't start as intended. It was something else entirely. It's a long, convoluted path that began with a magazine assignment that was about. There was a fashion assignment about something else entirely, and one thing led to another, and basically I found myself looking for people to cast for something that were younger people, and I found that I was able to access art schools as a way to like look for people by doing an exchange of my services of some sort. So be it a meeting with students or a classroom or whatever. And then this itself then became the work. I just got interested in young people in that stage of development, I guess, and didn't know where it was headed. Certainly did not have this title of Advice for Young Artists at all. And in fact, in its origins, I was going to photograph young artists and old artists was the original idea. And then on like one of my first excursions, I photographed in Iowa, actually, at a university. And then I photographed a retired professor. And it was a great experience, but I was just like, I don't think those pictures need to be part of this. I play the role of the older artist.
Right. You came to that realization.
I came to that realization right about then. It's like the only reason I wanted to photograph them was as a stand-in for me.
Sure.
So that's not enough, like, to bother people.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm always fascinated when people find things sort of along the way in terms of not setting out for this book in mind. This wasn't the end goal. And you mentioned sort of, in exchange for your service, do you find that sort of that way of like bartering of, hey, I'm a photographer, if using that as sort of, I'm a tool for you, whatever you need, is that sort of a way to get in, like a way for access for you?
It definitely can be. I mean, it's a fraught path, of course,
Sure.
because it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, I just did something totally different subject that dealt with, it was just a small commission with some healers in Switzerland. Okay.
Amazing.
And then very often they wanted pictures for their websites or what have
Right.
you. And like, that's totally cool. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm able to work that, but that can spin out of control quickly, and then suddenly you're shooting a wedding or something.
I was gonna say I've bitten off more than I could chew a time or two. Where yeah, sure, whatever you guys need, and then it ends up being a lot more than that.
Yeah, and it's tricky, and it's like people's expectation of things too, and that can affect your editing, and but
It can get messy.
Yeah, it can get messy. I mean, the thing about this exchange is that I would approach a school and I would talk to an art professor, and they we're speaking the same language. So, and I would tell them, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I would say that very directly, like, this is not a documentary. I really just want to like play around, like a student. But of course, I know, and I would say to them, I know you can't tell the administrators that, because that doesn't make any sense. But I know you understand that. So you can say whatever you need to say. You can say it's, he's doing a project on art schools or whatever. And that's been a tricky thing about this project, is that that it's not that it's not about art schools in America or something like that. But then that's basically the issue I face almost every project I do, that it's about something else under the surface. Yeah.
I wondered about that because that's something that I personally, it's like when I can't clearly define something, I struggle with it, but I gravitate towards those sort of things when I can't specifically put it in a specific category or say this is what it is.
I mean, that's what art. I mean, that's what art is. That's sort of how it differentiates itself from journalism or what have you. So that like from the very beginning with Sleeping by the Mississippi, I'm able to I can quickly communicate to someone, oh, I'm photographing along the Mississippi River. They got it.
Sure.
I can get access. I can do all those things, but it's really not about that.
Right.
And so that balancing act. One thing I wanted to note about a project, sort of not knowing where it's going. This is super important to me with these long-term personal projects. So if I'm doing something smaller, like the Swiss Healers or whatever, that's just like a 10-day shoot. I need to kind of know what it is going into it.
Right.
But with personal work, I love just finding my way, which is why I tend to be very secretive. Not like, which sounds pretentious, but it's just if I told a person, I mean, even like, my studio manager, if I told him what I was doing, then there's a part of me that feels like I need to do that thing. And so I really like keeping it wide open so that I can go where I want to go for as long as I possibly can. And then at a certain point, one has to talk about it.
Sort of trying to keep out any sort of outside influence without sharing things too soon, and trying to just keep my cards kind of close to the chest, I guess. But that idea as well, I hadn't really thought about when you speak it into existence, and people are anticipating that. Yeah. You can kind of get married to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to be clear that I don't think that's good advice for example, that, I'm not sure it's healthy. And of course, I do work, I participate in a grad program, and they can't do that at all. I mean, they have to talk about it relentlessly. And I do think I keep my cards too close to the vest. Probably, I fall too far on that side of the spectrum, probably.
Right.
And I should probably share a bit earlier and a bit more, but I am what I am.
You're still learning. We're all still learning. I mean, this whole thing, the whole advice for young artists, I mean, for you to sort of immerse yourself in that world again and surround yourself with young artists who are playing and figuring it out. Mm-hmm. I love that idea of sort of reconnecting with that sense of that younger artist in yourself. Were there things that you felt reconnected to your younger self as you were sort of in that space around these people? What was that like for you to just sort of take in all of this energy at this stage in your life and in your career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, but actually, do you mind if I turn the tables for a second?
No, of course.
And ask you, what do you remember, be it in photography or whatever creative form, that when it first was oh, this is cool. That what was it for you? What's the origin story for you?
For me, it was skateboarding. I was always taking photos of my friends and I skateboarding, sort of learning the two together at the same time. But there was a moment when I was flipping through a magazine, and it was specifically the photo issue of Thrasher magazine. They used to do every year where it was
Amazing. Yeah.
heavily influenced on just the photography, and it was a thick edition of the magazine. And I remember flipping through that and seeing everything from the skating to the portraits and just being like, this is what, like, this is everything. This is putting the one thing that we all love the most, just displaying it in the best way possible. And it was just immediately connecting with all of that. Not just the skateboarding, again, just
exactly.
the portrait, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that feeling, and then maybe, I don't know if you reached a point later where you're like, oh, that's corny, those fisheye lenses, or this whatever, or they're wearing those clothes, or whatever the thing is, and then you get cynical.
Right.
And, you know, so generally, if you're an artist, you had that moment. And I can think of that moment when I was just fully immersed. And also, you're like, I mean, there's a naivete where you're like, I could be the greatest ever at this, or whatever, whatever. You're not really, you don't really have a sense of the field, basically.
Right.
And it's all wide open. And so I remember that moment. And I mean, there's a very specific one of just drawing in my bedroom.
I was going to say that I read about it in the book, and I immediately connected to that.
Yeah, and it's so simple. It's not like a story. It's just, but I can tap into that feeling.
Yeah.
And then I can think about different time periods in my life where I felt that again. And it's, and it is that it's a level of concentration too, where everything sort of falls away. And so anyway, when I was visiting these schools, that was not happening, when I was meeting with classrooms, with students and so forth as much. But when I got left alone, and particularly I think of these still lifes that I made, and I would get left alone, and I was, maybe there's a still life kind of, or these materials for a still life set up in a classroom, and I would start playing with them and kind of building my own still life. And I was just sort of giddy with it. It's completely formal. There's no, expression of anything. It's just playing, and which is kind of like that beginning drawing where you're just immersed in the tools. And I would tap into that feeling, which in some ways is why I think those pictures for me are the most impactful in the book.
Finding those photos, you weren't looking for this book in particular, and you even stating to the people, I don't know exactly yet what I'm doing. How did that influence what you were looking to shoot? Were you just sort of open to whatever kind of caught your eye? Did you have specific ideas or physical subjects, symbols? Were there any things that you were looking for in this, or were you really just sort of open to what was around you?
Yeah, in the beginning, I mean, the way I would try to do it is I would try to, as part of this exchange, then I would have someone give me a tour of the art department.
Yeah.
And so often I wouldn't even bring the camera. It would just be a speed tour of all the studios, and, sometimes there'd be grad studios and there would be classrooms, and then I would just be like notating in my brain, stuff that caught my eye, basically.
Yeah.
And that if I had time, if I was granted time, that I could potentially go back to. And then, depending on the circumstance, I would say, can someone bring me back there? Or sometimes it was very loosey-goosey, and I was free to just wander around.
Yeah.
This was something really interesting, by the way. It's a side note. It's not part of the project because, again, it's not a documentary.
Right.
But I was photographing these different types of schools, and weirdly, I found it harder to get access to art schools often.
Really?
There was like more administrative stuff I had to go through generally for whatever reason. And it was just sometimes I was granted freedom. So at Harvard of all places, they just like let me loose. And I was just like, and it's pretty big, so I'm just like roaming, and it was amazing. And you just wouldn't think that.
No. You would
And
think at an art
yeah,
school they would roll out the red carpet, whatever you
yeah,
need.
or whatever, or it was just, yeah, but it was sometimes,
That's so
and like the only
fascinating.
school that I really had a problem getting access to was I won't name it, but it was an art school,
Sure.
and it was just funny how that played. And that's not true of every art school by any means.
Of course.
It was just kind of interesting.
Yeah. That
But
is, yeah.
but when I was free, it was just the greatest. But that's always the case, as photographers, is like
Yeah.
you just want to roam around and wander, but
You want that time to play.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. But depending on the circumstance, you
Sure.
have to jump through different hoops.
I hope you're all enjoying this conversation with Alex so far, and we will get right back into it after I take a minute to pay some bills and tell you about the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. I set my own website up with Squarespace over 10 years ago, way before they were ever a sponsor here on the channel, because they truly are the best all-in-one place to build your own website. Anybody can get started with a professionally designed Squarespace website template, and no matter what your needs are, you can customize things to fit your look and update and add new features as you see fit. Years ago, when I was mostly photographing portraits and weddings, corporate gigs, I used my website as a place to just showcase my work. Clients could reach out and book appointments or schedule things with me through my website. Nowadays, I use my website for things like the online store, being able to self-publish and sell my own zines, my own photo books. Everything I do, I manage directly through my own website. And you can do the same thing for yourself entirely free at squarespace.com. But when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/MattDay and use the code MattDay at checkout. That'll save you 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel. Now, let's get back to the conversation. When you were sort of after gathering all of the pieces, I want to talk about the post-its and that those are included throughout the book as well. But in terms of just the photographs, what sort of role did sequencing the photos play in a book like this, I guess, from start to finish, as opposed to some of your other projects, which I'm assuming were approached and, put together in a much different way?
Yeah, it's a little different. At some point, I should think through how this has changed over the course of time. But I feel like I'm a little less linear in the way I organize pictures now. Although I guess it depends on the project, whatever. But basically, from the very beginnings, I can't help myself but think in book terms.
Right.
So I'm always thinking, these 2 pages, flipping a page, what's going to happen? Are there going to be pictures on both sides? How am I going to generate pauses? All of that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of musical thinking,
Yeah.
and rhythm, but of course not knowing how it's going to play out. And then I have to say that I start really early making, PDFs of things, just because it's more efficient than a physical dummy. Just while I'm moving,
Right.
and so that I can just sort of begin to think about flipping the page and all of that, and developing a rhythm. And I think that's where some of these kind of blank pictures occurred. Because I knew that I was creating frenzied photographs, and then I wanted pause pictures, and it becomes so intuitive,
Right.
and I don't know. I maybe over the course of time, I feel like I have more liberty to be that way. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, with time and experience, it's not your first rodeo, but it's such an interesting departure, I guess, from your other books. Where did the idea of the post-its and was that sort of just was that a physical tool in the process that sort of made its way into the book?
Yeah, I think it goes, so the beginnings of everything in that book-like thinking are titles. And so I'm constantly generating different titles as I go. And at one point it became this title. I don't remember the sequence. And the title scared me. I found it very disturbing title. It's so presumptuous and
I feel, if I can, the cover being the cracked portrait of yourself, I think it offsets it enough to where.
well that I mean that's that was definitely the intention of
That's
the picture.
perfect. That's great.
But even still, it gives me I just cringe at the thing, and but I like that feeling also.
Sure.
And it so when I was coming around to that title, and thinking about advice and sort of sometimes the like, if someone asks me for advice and I kind of freeze up because I feel like I'm going to say something really empty, and there was this idea of these Post-its as like placeholders for where I'm going to put really great advice or something, but for now I'll just say, be patient or something like that. It's just like, and somewhere intuitively it came to be that what I was doing was analogous to this book I did called Broken Manual, and basically Broken Manual, which, that was the first, I think, big departure I made photographically, in terms of structuring of a book. And it became this sort of unfinished book that functioned kind of as a manual. It didn't work. And this was doing something similar. It's this kind of half-finished book of advice for young artists that doesn't really have advice. It's kind of, I'm playing sort of the same game, and I'm in both cases. They're like, I think of my work as being on a spectrum between documentary on one side and sort of narcissistic, inward looking, whatever, expressionism on the other side. And this book and Broken Manual are further on the narcissistic side of the spectrum.
Right.
Hence the cringy cover.
I feel like most young artists very much a work in progress and still figuring things out and putting things together. For you, what were some of your kind of big takeaways, sort of re-entering that space again, and being around these young artists? What was that like for you, or what were some of the things that you felt you took away from the project?
I mean, it's so the very first place that I went, again, when it wasn't this project at all, and I was in Kentucky, and I had this idea. I was desperately looking for like loners, basically, and I was having trouble, and so then I thought to go to school, and I was able to meet with a grad program, and I didn't find those people there, and also, and it was a fine encounter, but I then decided to go to an undergrad program on my drive home in Tennessee, and I think it's Middle Tennessee State University is the name of it, I think, and it was like and I met with Photo 1 students, and I was like, oh, this is much more the energy that I'm looking for. They have the thing that I am looking for, and I could see that again and again. And it's, in a way, it's like, because at art schools, sometimes you have very advanced artists that are even in their beginning years, because a part of me wanted to find that teenage self of mine when I was 16.
Yeah.
But that's a huge access problem, and I don't want to deal. I like getting access to high schools or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's the vibe that and I could feel it, you can just, like, when people would talk about something
Yeah.
and they're not jaded.
Did you find people all in Photo One across sort of different levels, people who were still very, very new, very much like they have that hunger, that passion and excitement? And were there other people also in that same level, but maybe had a more advanced and had some of the maybe more
Sure. Yeah,
narcissistic
absolutely.
views?
Sure. I mean, a really, so an important person to me, and in my life generally, is a guy. His name's Cooper,
Yeah.
and he was a kid who was. I did this thing years ago, the Winnebago workshop. That was a workshop with teenagers, and basically that thing is exactly what I was talking about, like trying to find that teenage version of myself, and and then from that program, I started working with this kid Cooper, and mentored him or whatever. He's a painter, and then he was in college. He assisted me, so he ends up he's photographed in a pound of pictures. There's a picture of him, and so it's not like this concept of like of sort of tapping into the energy of young people is definitely not new for me. So he's in a pound of pictures, and then he's like moving up, the art ladder, and the jadedness and all of that. And he ends up in this book. So it's just his hand, but he's doing a portrait paint because he actually got, from working with me, I think it's fair to say,
Yeah.
he got inspired in doing stuff like on the run, like not in his studio, but going out in the world. So
Oh,
he,
awesome.
so he found someone, and he asked them if he could paint them in his apartment. And he said, "Alec, do you want to come along?" I was like, "Oh, amazing. I'll photograph this. This fits right in with what I'm doing." He didn't even know what I was working on at the time, I think. And that picture ends up in the book. And he's much further along. I mean, and so he doesn't have that total new, wonder. But I'm also like, I remember it in him. I see him at different stages. I gave a talk recently in London, and the first question was about how parenting was a part, like, did it play a role in this? And it's such a great question because it's hugely important. And so my kids are like 18 and 22. And one of the things, as a parent, you watch them at all these developmental stages, and a part of you is like not reliving those stages, but seeing it from a different perspective and being reminded of how you went through those stages. I mean, this is just all a way of saying that it's about that beginning feeling, and really the question for me, and not just with this project, but over and over again, is how can I access that feeling? How can I touch it again and not just get into a pattern?
I guess falling into those patterns for the artists who do get maybe past that stage of everything is, everything's exciting and everything's great. When you do start to feel that sort of jaded feeling, or you can't tap into that feeling again, what have you found that works for you? Or is there anything that you recommend to people who feel as if, they've kind of gotten through that initial stage and now they're just sort of stuck or feeling like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. It was interesting. I saw, my friend and colleague Greg Halpern, he did this post in conjunction with Mac, I think, about his new book, and he wrote at the beginning of it, like, he's like, I don't know if it's photography or me, but like, I get bored with so many things I see, and I identified with that, but I'm like, I've been through so many phases of that.
Yeah.
And I really remember it before Broken Manual, big time, because that was like the beginning of a certain kind of digital photography or whatever was taking storm. And so one thing that I do that I try to remember, and this comes from speaking with students, and actually back then, Broken Manual era, is that because I was quite jaded about photography going into that, and you talk to students and you're coming from this perspective of cynicism, and then you realize that they've just developed their first roll of film. It's like it's magic time. They don't care. Like, it's not all over for them. And so to come in like all and whining about that, I'm not saying Greg Halpern's whining at all. I'm like myself.
Yeah.
So just to remember that, like, oh, you had a different perspective, or you could say that like skateboard, but like there's still people that just discovered a skateboard like last week,
right.
and it's
Absolutely.
like they don't know everything, and so the first time they do this trick is like the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah.
So to remember that, and then for myself, getting into situations where I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm scared and I'm confused, and without like pathetically getting on a skateboard now at my age, like starting skateboarding now would be very bad. But no.
I have faith in you. That's all I'll say.
No.
I have faith in you.
No. There's things you can't. There are things you can't do. That's it. But to and so I've tried to structure my career in such a way that that I have these experimental things. Collaborating with a musician, or that Winnebago workshop was one. Various things that I do just to kind of break out of a pattern, and to try to balance that with the other stuff, which is like commercial work and making a living and all that stuff. So hopefully kind of scare myself. And that's the thing, like when we talk about that cover,
mm-hmm.
and the inclusion of myself and all that, it was scary in a exciting way that felt like, oh, I could break new ground for myself here. And knowing that like there are lots of people that are gonna look at it like 50-year-old man getting on a skateboard, like sort of wanting to avert their eyes.
Right.
And I know, one of the things I thought about in talking to you, and I felt this basically, I gave a couple public talks recently, and, when I start talking about like these being photographed digitally, I can feel like 3/4 of the audience just sort of deflating. They're just like bummed out, and I get it, because I get I get why the enthusiasm for film and all that, but this was just an important part of this too, and it's something I was excited to talk about because I started it on film, and it was just so like earnest, and it was just kind of warm, and it just was not the sensibility that felt right to it. It wasn't a way for me to get the humor that I was going for.
Right.
And also I kind of knew what I was doing with the film. Like I wasn't lost with it. And I had this whole thing because I discovered, and I know that for your audience, this is like, it's embarrassing to say because everyone will know this, but I discovered, focus stacking.
Right.
And it was like, wow. And it was fun playing with it. And then kind of like having mistakes happen, not knowing what I was doing, but goofing around. And then, which is really not unlike when you start, trying different developers or whatever, and it's just like being immersed in the tools in a fresh way. I enjoyed all of that.
I really appreciate you taking the time. This is an incredible book, one of many of yours, but I'm excited for people to check this one out. And I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion here. Again, thank you so much for your time. And if you have anything coming up that you'd like to promote, anything at all, fill
I
that
mean, I
in
don't know.
later.
Do you have a lot of people in Japan watching? I have a show in Japan.
There's people everywhere. We'll be sure to put
Yeah.
information.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, I have a big survey exhibition opening next month in Japan. So
Amazing.
come to Tokyo.
Huge thank you to Alec for joining me for the conversation here. I really hope you all enjoyed it. Definitely check out his new book, Advice for Young Artists. I'll have links to that down below if you're interested, as well as information on his upcoming show in Japan. Anything that you guys have, any thoughts, questions at all, leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you thought of this. And that's it for today. So thank you guys for watching. I love you, and I'll see you next time.